And, before we get started, we always love to do a Green Home Institute membership spotlight. Now, this is not one, but three of our members who teamed up to achieve 2018 Passive House Source Zero certification and traditional Passive House certification on this project. A huge congrats to architect Mark Miller, Abueva Builders, and the rating team at Catalyst Partners. You can check out the house and the details at the link here below. One of the coolest features is a -6 site energy use index and an envelope leakage rate of 0.041. Next up, they're not done yet. They're going to be receiving GHI Zero Energy certification and LEED certification. Please tell all your friends and help spread the word. And this is who Green Home Institute members are. This is what Green Home Institute members do. And so can you. Get signed up at our website here today. All right, well, welcome to our session here today. And before we get started, a huge thanks to our top tier sponsor, Rheem. Rheem has heat pump water heaters of the future. And these can be paired together in multifamily housing for centralized systems or as single units placed in a closet with proper ventilation to ensure airflow. This is up to 400% energy efficiency. They have a 240 volt with many different options for backup water heating, or a 120 volt system, which can quickly replace gas systems in old building retrofits. The way these work is they pull heated water through the air, filter it, and it's absorbed through R410A refrigerant using a compressor to heat the coils wrapped around the tank. All sorts of different modes through their EcoNet to detect energy use, put on settings, sense if there's leaks. These are coming through Inflation Reduction Act tax credits up to 30% of the cost or $2,000 per year, as well as the electrical costs that it might take to make these improvements. If you're not ready to go heat pump, that's okay. You can do an electric resistance that still has the time of use demand response programs built right into it. So check out all their opportunities over at Rheem. Also, save water in your multifamily development. Niagara Conservation has 0.8 gallons per flush toilets, and even lower that can save thousands and thousands of dollars in water in multifamily properties. So check them out over at niagara.com. All right, well, welcome to our session on the multifamily decarbonization roadmap with our friends at SAHF. Before we get started on this session, as a reminder, this is brought to you by the Green Home Institute. The Green Home Institute is a nonprofit with a mission to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. Today, I will be your moderator. My name's Brett Little. I'm the education manager here, and we're a small but mighty team of 3 ready to help you. As always, this course is approved for multiple continuing education units, including Certified Green Home Professional Designation under Energy, and AIA Health, Welfare, and Safety may make it applicable to your state-based design or contractor license. So I'm super excited to hand it off to our guests today for the SAHF Portfolio Carbon Roadmap. Ian, as well as Lauren, who's been here before, I believe, on the show through a different organization. So Lauren, welcome back. Ian, good to have you. And please, everyone, take it away.
Thanks, Brett and GHI for hosting us today. We're excited to share more about some free tools we've developed for the industry. So I am Lauren Westmoreland with Stewards of Affordable Housing for the Future. We're also known as SAHF. And I'm just going to scroll through a couple of level setting slides to begin with. So let's move to the next one. So here's our learning objectives in case anyone needs to see that for your CEUs. And these are also established in the webinar. And then our agenda for today. So we're going to talk a little bit about SAHF and why we're here talking to you about multifamily and specifically affordable housing. A little bit of our journey over the past decade and actually even longer to address energy and water efficiency. And then now looking forward, how can the affordable housing sector, multifamily specifically, think about decarbonization and the journey to get there? And then we'll give you a little overview of the carbon calculator and our carbon roadmap, both free tools for the industry. And Ian, when you get a chance, can you put a link to the those tools in the chat for folks to grab. And then we'll make sure to save some time for Q&A. Also to note that we are offering some individualized free 30-minute TA assistance should you want to dig more into the tools and talk more specifics about your portfolio. We'll put that link in the chat at the end of the webinar. So who is SAHF and why am I talking with you here today? So I'm Lauren Westmoreland. I lead our energy and sustainability work. Licensed architect, although I no longer stamp any drawings, and have been working both in the past as a HERS rater as well as a lot around energy and sustainability across the field. So I'm excited to bring these tools here with you today, and I'll let Ian introduce himself.
All right, thank you, Lauren. Sorry, I was just posting that link. My name is Ian Po-Yamagata. I'm SAHF's Data and Analytics Associate. I've been with SAHF for coming up on 2 years now. Kind of just helping across teams in all of our data collection and tool design. I've been helping Lauren out with the kind of design and ongoing maintenance and updating of our calculator and roadmap tool. And really excited to be here today and share all this great information with everyone.
Thanks, Ian. And then SAHF, who are we? So we're a small nonprofit collaborative that has 12 very large affordable housing providers. They're all nonprofits and they serve approximately 230,000 residents across the country. We're in almost every single state, including Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It represents approximately 2,000 properties that have around 150,000 units. Some of our members may be familiar to you, like National Church Residences, Preservation of Affordable Housing, National Housing Trust, and others. Because our members are looking to ensure both the increasing the quantity and the quality of affordable housing, energy and sustainability has been top of their mind, and they have been working on this for more than a decade. Oops. Previously, in 2020, we wrapped up our big initiative that we have been working on since 2013. Our members committed to 20% energy and water reductions by 2020. In an effort that took many, many people, they actually blew past it, achieving 29% in energy savings and 24% in water savings. And that was incredibly significant. Those hit both the bottom line, both for residents and for owners alike. And now that we knew that we can accomplish that, our members are continuing to do that work. And at the same time, we're looking towards carbon emissions. And what does it mean not to just save that energy, but make sure we're using energy that's going to benefit residents, communities, and the nation alike? So how did we get to this work, and what does this look like in the future? So over the course of that big reach, it's not one thing. There's no one silver bullet, as I'm sure many of you on this call know. It was everything from, committing to green building programs like Enterprise Green Communities or the National Green Building Standard, et cetera. It was taking on those discretionary energy retrofits. So if a utility program was offered, replacing light bulbs in common spaces, upgrading toilets, some of our members do use the Niagara toilets, and installing renewable energy. Lots around operations and maintenance. This all sort of came together. And over the course of time, we've been able to see what does that look like and how many units are we impacting, and just trying to figure out how to make sure that our members have the tools and resources that they need to do that. And as they're facing more and more pressure around decarbonization, taking these lessons learned and being able to apply it to actually creating a more targeted journey for them and really for the sector at large is going to help us make sure that we can make that transition, we can make it equitably, and we can make it quickly. So let's talk a little bit more about the journey around decarbonization and where we're going and why we thought these tools would be necessary. So one thing to note in all of this that I think is really important is that as we're thinking about this, we'll be talking about tools, but we can't lose sight of why we're doing this. This is not about the buildings. This is about the people who live in the buildings. And as we're thinking about electrification and we're thinking about decarbonization and energy efficiency, just remember to keep in your mind that we need to design and upgrade and provide ways for residents to feel comfortable and move forward in their buildings. And that's why I really love this quote is that if there's reasons why buildings aren't working, it's probably because we gave people buildings that don't work for them. So just be thinking about that as we go through all of it. And in addition to all of our energy work that we do, we are looking at ways to ensure resident voice and agency throughout this process. So why do we need these tools? Why do we need carbon tools that are going to help us prioritize? You saw all the work that we had to do. That's not all going to happen at once. That can't all happen at once. We don't have the workforce. We don't have the capacity. We don't have the dollars. So what do we need to think about? So there's a lot of goals and requirements that are coming out that are impacting our buildings, both for affordable and multifamily at general. If you're looking at voluntary programs like DOE's Better Climate Challenge or mandatory standards like building energy and just regular building performance standards. And then we're seeing changes in industry-led policies and practices. You may have seen recently that HUD and USDA put out a proposal to update their building energy code requirements. Those types of things are popping up all over the place. And in order to properly arm affordable housers with the tools and resources that they need, we created two tools. So the first one is the Safe Carbon Calculator, and that allows affordable housing and really any multifamily portfolio owners to calculate their annual baseline and year over year carbon emissions. It helps you do annual tracking and reporting and all of those things associated with it. And once you get your baseline, you may be forced to or may be looking to set that goal of reducing your carbon emissions. And when you're looking to reduce your emissions by 50%, as you mentioned, you can't do it all at once. So creating a roadmap or a plan in order to make that transition over time is really important. And that's where the Safe Carbon Roadmap comes in that we just released about a month ago. And that's really going to help you do scenario testing. It's going to let you track progress, etc. And why is this so important? Why can't we just do all this work at once? Well, I think it's important to start talking about programs coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act and what it really means for the sector. Inflation Reduction Act, it's great. We're very excited about it. It's an unprecedented opportunity. And at the same time, this is not going to provide us with full market transformation. And let me just walk through some numbers to really illustrate that. So first of all, this is the HUD Green and Resilient Retrofit Program, specifically for HUD-assisted properties. So properties that have vouchers or other sort of assistance, but are owned by private entities like our members. When you look at the number of units that are likely to be impacted through this program, which is coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act, we're looking at about 12,000 units nationwide. A great way to get some really good case studies and best practices out of it. But we also need to recognize that there's over 1.3 million HUD-assisted units across the country. So it's a good start, but it's not going to be market transformation. In addition, this funding is not available to low-income housing tax credit properties that do not have HUD assistance, of which we know there's lots out there. In addition, this is not available to public housing. So again, a good start, but for portfolio owners, it's not going to be a tool they can use across their whole portfolio. Additionally, home energy rebates that are going to be coming out from the Department of Energy and going through state energy offices. This is another really great program. We're very excited about it. And at the same time, it's going to provide ways to get some case studies and best practices, but not necessarily be that market transformation. So from a multifamily standpoint, all states need to set aside 10% of their allocation to be for multifamily. In the end, if you start looking at the rebates that are available, both on the energy efficiency side as well as the electrification side, we're talking about thousands of units, not hundreds of thousands of units. And when we think about the multifamily housing that's out there, these things become, in a sense, a drop in the bucket. And you can either look at it that way. You can look at it as a drop in the bucket, or, perhaps you can look at it as we're going to get those innovators and early adopters started. And the reason why it's so important to think about these things is that because we can't do everything at once, we shouldn't be doing energy audits or preparing for work across an entire portfolio all at once. We need to make sure that we're prioritizing. Where are we going to get the most impact? What locations are really ready to take this on? What type of properties should we work on? And how does this help you get towards your greater goal? And through all of that, that's why we have developed these tools, because the goal of them is to help you prioritize. If you have 100 properties across your portfolio, it's overwhelming to look at them at once. So let's figure out where those priorities are, and maybe then you're only doing some deep digging and some like property level planning across 10 of those properties, which for those in the affordable housing sector who I know are fairly overwhelmed with lots of different things going on, that seems much more achievable than thinking about those 100 properties across the portfolio. So let's talk a little bit more about what's actually in the calculator and how multifamily portfolio owners can use this. So within this calculator, we'll be looking at only scope 1 and scope 2 emissions for that property level. So scope 1 emissions being all of the fossil fuels you burn on site. And then scope 2 really being about that purchased electricity where you're not burning anything on site, but there are emissions associated with it. It does not include scope 3, which is more around that corporate decision making. And while we feel that is important right now to think about those IRA programs, as well as any other policies and practices that are coming up within your states, it is really important to think about those property level scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. The typical tool user, we see it as people who have large, diverse portfolios. So I keep on mentioning affordable housing owners and multifamily owners. We also think that this could have some applicability at like a local jurisdiction level as well, especially as you're perhaps thinking about building performance standards or other things happening. If you want to make sure that you are moving your jurisdiction forward, but not inequitably placing burden upon either subsidized or unsubsidized affordable housing, this could be a tool for you as well. The other thing to note that many are probably familiar with in the affordable housing sector is that typical tool users are going to be missing some data. And we'll talk a little bit more about how we have some assumptions that you can place on those buildings that you don't have all the data. And then we know in certain cases, you may be accounting for other things like your rooftop solar, any fleet vehicles, any fuels you may be using for generators or landscaping separately. And there's an opportunity to add that information in as well. And, the reason why we built this tool, despite the fact that there's other tools out there in the industry, is because we know that access to resident utility data is very difficult in the best of times and sometimes impossible. So for those who have access to full resident data, good for you. I'm very excited for you because that's awesome. EPA has a calculator that you can use. This calculator is really about when you don't have that information. So what we've done is we've given you the ability to look and sort of see if you have whole building data. And if you don't, you have the option of applying an assumed baseline to it. And you may be asking, how do you know what my assumed baseline should be? So we worked with Bright Power, which has their energy scorecards benchmarking platform, to develop a baseline that's appropriate based on your location, your square footage, your building type, and if it's all electric or not. If you know those couple of things about your property, we can apply an appropriate baseline to it. The assumed baseline that's behind it is geographically diverse and is around over 12,000 properties. So, and we break down that energy use by fuel so that we're making sure that we're applying it appropriately. So if you don't have your data, this is a great best guess in all of this. So let me go ahead and hand it over to Ian to do a little tour of the roadmap, or I'm sorry, the calculator.
Yep. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for the introduction and a little bit of level setting. So like as Lauren said, this is a portfolio level tool mostly designed for multifamily property owners. The main goal of this tool is to calculate your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions in a baseline that can then be used in the roadmap tool. And like Lauren just mentioned, it can be calculated using both whole building data and incomplete data using the assumptions that we've implemented into the tool. So starting off in the introduction tab, this is just a little bit of introductions into some definition, the orientation of the calculator, and a little bit of a flow chart on whether you have data or not. The main thing to notice here is your carbon emissions year. This is going to be the year that your data is being pulled from, and it's important to have an accurate year there because we do use the EPA's grid data that will be used in the assumptions. I also want to note that at the bottom here in the flowchart, we do have a link to an Energy Star Portfolio Manager carbon emissions template. So this template is in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and when you click on it, it generates a template that has all the data points that we will be using in the whole building data tab. And all you have to do is select the timeline of the data and the properties that you want to include in your data. I'm going to skip the portfolio summary and SAHF roadmap tab and come back to those at the end. And the first tab that you're really going to be going to after this is the whole building data tab. So this is where you're going to be entering information on properties that you want included in your calculation that you either know have whole building data or you think might have whole building data. If you have properties, for example, that you know you don't have complete data on, you wouldn't enter them here, or you could, but we recommend you just go straight to the incomplete data tab at the bottom and enter that information there. So as I mentioned, with the template that's generated in Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you're going to see all these fields in this template when you download it. And you can basically just do a straight copy and paste and enter the data into here. And then after that, you'll see some information populate on the left side here. The main one to note is this EUI flag that's energy use intensity and the data review column, which says move or keep. Basically, in this tool, we developed a flag that is designed to indicate whether we think your property is performing at either a level that is very efficient or under efficiently performing. And if we think it's outside of the range that we quantify as acceptable, you'll see that it says fail here, and then you'll have the option to keep or move the property, where keep means that you want to indicate that the information entered here is accurate and complete and you think it's whole building, or move is maybe you're not sure, you think the data could be incorrect, and you want to use the assumptions that we've generated to calculate the emissions from that property and include it in the portfolio level. So say, for example, you have a newer property that was just recently developed, or it has renewable energy on site, and it's performing very efficiently, but that makes sense too because it is a newer property and has renewable energy. That would be a property that you want to indicate as keep. Again, if you have properties where you're not sure if the data is correct or not, and you're just not confident in it, that would be an opportunity to move it to the incomplete data tab. So moving to the incomplete data tab, you'll first have the user input table, which is an opportunity for users to enter in those properties that they know they don't have complete data on and weren't included in the whole building data tab. And again, like Lauren said, we just take some general information about the property, such as location and size and number of units, and we calculate the estimated emissions based off of that information. You'll also notice here we have a macro that allows you to add a row in case you need to add more properties to this list. At the bottom here, you'll see the automatic transfer table. These are properties that were entered in the whole building data tab, and then you indicated as move, and their information has been transferred over to this table and will be calculated using the incomplete data assumptions. After that, you have your renewable energy data tab. First, you'll see some summary information about your current portfolio, about the renewable energy information that was entered in your whole building data tab, whether it was on-site renewable energy or off-site renewable energy, and about the RECs maintained or whether they were not maintained. At the bottom, you then have an option to add additional assets. So say, for example, in your whole building data tab, you know that there is some kind of renewable energy asset on site at a property and it wasn't indicated in the information you entered there. You can then add additional assets to this table here, indicating what the asset description is. So on-site renewable energy and used on-site renewable energy and exported or off-site renewable energy. Then renewable energy generation amounts, and then the percentage of RECs maintained. We also recommend that you associate with a specific property as renewable energy assets that aren't associated to a property will be included in your kind of portfolio level analysis and summary. But when you try to export this data into the SAHF roadmap, if it's not tied to a specific property, we can unfortunately not bring it into the roadmap tool. Moving on to the direct emissions tab, again, you'll have a portfolio level summary of your direct emissions. This is taken from both your whole building data and incomplete data. And then at the bottom, you again have the option to add on additional scope 1 emissions or direct emissions. For example, this could be something for like an on-site vehicle fleet that you don't have in your whole building data table, but you want to include it in your scope 1 calculations. This would be a great opportunity and location to enter that information. Similarly, in the indirect emissions tab, you have a summary of your portfolio scope 2 indirect emissions. And then again, you have the opportunity to add in additional water or additional electricity usage that you want to include in your scope 2 emissions calculation, but aren't tied directly to a property necessarily, or wouldn't be calculated in your whole building data table. So after you add in all this information, you can go back to your portfolio summary tab, which will just show you some high level or some overview of your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, as well as your total emissions, as well as some helpful charts to show the distribution of your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And this one I specifically like because it shows your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, but then split up by what was calculated using whole building data and what was calculated using incomplete data. Similarly, in the SAHF Roadmap tab, you'll see some information about your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions at the top here, and a table down here that shows all of the properties entered in your tool. The purpose of this tab was to create an export tab that you could copy this information from into your SAHF Roadmap tool. Both this summary information at the top and this table at the bottom. When we get to that tool, you'll see that there's also a macro button installed in it that automatically copies this information for you and makes it nice and easy. And that's pretty much it. Back to you, Lauren.
There were a couple of clarification questions, if I may, before we transition. So thinking about these inputs that you referenced, these basic inputs, Ian, when you're saying it sets aside incomplete versus complete data, can you clarify again, is that you're talking about those 4 or 5 different inputs, whether they have them all or not, or are you talking about energy use data when you say incomplete data?
Yeah. Do you want to take it, Lauren, or?
Sure. So it's both. So there's all of the data you're going to pull from your energy benchmarking platform. What we've discovered from looking at our members' Energy Star portfolio manager accounts is that they'll have all their properties in there, but not every property has what ends up looking like whole building data. Some only have common space usage. Some may only have like gas meters, whatever it is. But there's not really an easy way to check it. So what we did is we built essentially a tool that allows you to check it and identify pretty quickly, especially for those familiar with like, looking at your EUI to see if it seems like you have whole data or not. However, like there's also cases where you just might not have properties in an energy benchmarking platform. Perhaps it's a new property you're acquiring, or it's you're looking at, you just don't have that sort of setup. In that case, as Ian's showing here, you'd be able to, with just a few simple data points that you should have available, be able to put it into this table. So we talked with a housing authority. They have all of their buildings in Energy Star Portfolio Manager that they can pull out, but they were also curious about properties that are privately owned, that they don't have whole building data on, but they do have these data points, so they could enter it in here and sort of get a combination of both of them.
There was a question about integration with the Energy Star Portfolio Manager greenhouse gas reduction calculator. Is there any connection to that at all?
There's not. So their tool was launched a little bit before our tool. We think it's a great tool if you have whole building data. It does the calculations really nicely. It allows you to pull it directly from Energy Star Portfolio Manager, etc. But it's only going to calculate based on the data you have. And if you don't have whole building data, you're not going to have that.
You had mentioned this is a good tool for those who can't easily access, especially their tenants' data. In my experience, I've seen the utilities have these things called landlord portals. Am I just lucky? Is that rare? Is that rare across the country? Are you seeing more of those landlord portals? I know sometimes they're in really rough shape. Can you speak to that briefly?
Yeah. So Ian, if you can stop sharing, I will go ahead and share while I'm talking. So we have been working on trying to get access to whole building data for about a decade now. Our members have across their portfolio. They're all participants in the DOE Better Buildings Challenge. And we're at about half, 45% to half of the portfolio where they can get whole building data. We've heard, some big challenges in certain parts of the country around privacy issues, or just inability to access it. So I kind of want to say you're lucky, but
Hey,
I'm hoping that will change.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Fantastic. So thanks, Ian, for taking that quick walkthrough of the calculator. We're going to talk a little bit more around the roadmap. So now that you have been able to calculate your annual usage, your annual emissions, year over year, so you can go all the way back to, I think, 2017 in the calculator up to 2022. We know that you need to think about where you are going to go and moving forward. It's not enough to say, let's just keep on going. We all know that we have targets that either our state or local jurisdiction or our own organizations want to hit. So what is the SAFE roadmap? So it is a free tool for the affordable multifamily housing sector to create high-level plans. This is not, it's to help you do scenario planning, and it's to help you also understand the progress that you would look at making over the measured amount of time, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is. And also, like, what are the grid impacts of you doing this work as well? It should be user-friendly for those of you who do energy benchmarking, who do energy audits, who do energy modeling, that type of stuff. There's going to be a lot of familiar terms, a lot of things that you're going to know. We designed it with the thought around the staff at our members who are looking at this information on a regular basis. I want to note that this is not a GHG protocol reporting tool, because we work with a lot of assumed data that does not align with the greenhouse gas protocol, which is a basis of a lot of different programs and policies out there. I will say for the DOE Better Climate Challenge, they are making some important caveats, especially for the multifamily sector. I want to also note that this is not a property level planning tool. There are, I'm sure, a lot of amazing experts on this call and across the field that can do that property level work. That's incredibly important work, and this is not a substitution for their expertise. However, this should help you narrow down to those properties that you want them to look at. So what is this tool, the roadmap tool, and how does it sort of couple with the calculator? So we have a lot of references behind the scenes. We have some calculations and assumptions based on Bright Power and VEIC's work across the field, plus our own work with our members. We bring in a lot around energy pricing and emission factors from the U.S. Energy Information Administration, EPA, the national labs, etc. And then we pull in actual building data, all to give that basis for when you do the work in the roadmap. It's based on real assumptions that have been vetted by the industry. And then there's the user inputs that you will be putting in here. You will need to provide information about your property, which if you did the calculator, that's an easy translation over. You're going to have to consider what your emissions reduction targets are. What do you want to accomplish by when? You can always modify this, but that's important to note there. And then you need to think about how you're going to break your portfolio up, because you can't just apply the one decarb strategy across all of your portfolio. So thinking about whether you want to break it up by perhaps location, or you want to break it up by, building features or whatever it is. And Ian will show you a little bit more once we go through the tour. And speaking of emissions factors, I know this is always a big question around well, how are you getting these emissions factors and how much can I rely on the grid to clean itself versus how much work do I have to do on the decarbonization front? So we use emission intensities based on your target year, and we're pulling it from the National Renewable Energy Lab's Cambium data set. You can get that link. Brett has the slides should you need them to look at that documentation. And basically, you can get emissions through 2050. We have confidence in 10 years out or so. After 10 years or so, it's not quite as predictable, but you do have the availability there. In addition, one of the things that we also have in the roadmap that we'll go over is we assign each state a policy score. And we think that this is really important for you to note, because if you're thinking about applying decarbonization strategies, and you want to prioritize, you might want to prioritize in states that are really showing their commitment to doing this work. So we look at a lot of different things across the state using ACEEEs and other national groups rankings around everything from utility policies to building codes to things that are happening in the qualified allocation plan. And this too can help you segment and prioritize your portfolio. If you have a bunch of properties down in the Southeast and you have a bunch of properties in California, knowing the policy scores associated with those states may help you understand where you have more incentives to do that work. And then lastly, just wanted to briefly touch on what are the different types of strategies that we're making, decarbonization strategies that we're making available within the roadmap tool. It's everything from energy efficiency to electrification to renewable energy. And in all of this, you can layer strategies on top of each other. So if you're thinking about doing a light energy efficiency to 10 properties within your portfolio, you can also then select doing a heat pump domestic hot water heater too, and pair those two together and get the energy efficiency and decarbonization benefits. We have more information around the description of each of these different decarb strategies in the user manual that's on our website, along with how much we're assuming as far as like electricity reduction and energy reduction for each of these different things. For now, we know that these are the tried and true technologies out there, and we hope as the market evolves that we too can perhaps add in more strategies to address what we know are blossoming needs of the affordable housing sector. Oops, wrong way. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back off to Ian now to do a very quick tour of the roadmap.
And before we transition, Lauren, can I just get a better understanding of the last thing you said? The applications of technology suggestions isn't presenting itself in the tool as a checkbox like, oh, and I want to throw in heat pump water heaters and here's my new score. You're saying you go to your website and learn more about that. Am I understanding that right? Or is that going to be presented next?
So we'll show you the tour of the roadmap and you can select those strategies within the roadmap. So
Okay.
you say, I've got my California portfolio and I'm going to do a light energy efficiency retrofit.
Okay.
And then you say, oh, I'm going to do half of my California portfolio.
Okay.
And it'll show you how much energy you're saving. We also know from working with the sector that you guys want to know the details behind when we say light energy retrofit. What does that mean?
Right.
When we say, domestic hot water heat pumps, like what are your assumptions behind that? So in the user manual, we have a table that gives more background as to what our assumptions are to get those different energy efficiency savings.
All right, we'll proceed then. Thank you.
All right. All you, Ian.
Great. So like Lauren said, I'll try to go through this very briefly so we can have some questions at the end. And like Lauren mentioned, we do have our detailed instruction manual on SAHF's website as well as some video guides to help explain some of the slides a bit or tabs a bit more in depth. So I strongly recommend you watch those if you have any lingering questions at the end. But getting straight into it, once again, this is a portfolio level tool designed for multifamily property owners and is not recommended for commercial or single family residential portfolios. This intro tab mainly just focuses on some instructions surrounding the tool, as well as a link to the SAHF carbon calculator in case you need to access that as well. We do recommend that you use the calculator to calculate your carbon emissions baseline, your emissions totals and intensity that will be used in this tool. But if you have that information on hand already, you're more than welcome to use it in the tool and skip the calculator part. Getting into the property data import tab, this is the tab where you will be entering the list of properties you want included in your roadmap, as well as the relevant information that needs to be included for the calculations. As I mentioned in the calculator, we do have the roadmap export tab, and this table here is where you can essentially just copy and paste that information into this tool, as well as another option is using this macro that we installed that lets you navigate a file explorer and select the file that contains the relevant information. I want to note that in this property data required table, there's one column that isn't included in the roadmap. It's this building type column. We need this information because it relates to solar energy. And if you're planning on using that in your roadmap plan, we need to know the building type and it's not included in the calculator. As you'll see here, if you don't include required information in this table, it will be highlighted yellow to assist with the user identifying where they're missing information. The next set of columns is the custom group designation. Lauren touched on this a little bit, but this relates to how you want to segment your portfolio. So in our segmentation tab, you'll see we have some general fields that you can segment a portfolio by, such as climate region, state, hot water fuel. But if there's other ways that you want to segment your portfolio, such as something like primary occupancy type, or any other kind of custom group that you want to segment your portfolio by, you're more than welcome to indicate it here. And then the last set of columns just relates to optional data inputs. So these are automatically calculated using the information that's entered in the first set of columns here. And then you have the option to change it if you see that the information isn't correct. So say, for example, you know that this property does in fact have solar on site, you can just use the drop down to easily change that information. Moving on to the baseline and target, this is where you're going to be actually entering the information that relates to your carbon emissions reductions. So first, you just have your general portfolio information. Then you're going to be setting your target date, and then your carbon emissions reduction target and your energy efficient reduction target. This information is filled right now, but obviously when you're using this tool, it's going to be blank. And once again, it will highlight yellow for you to help you identify where you need to enter information that is required. At the bottom here, we have both a baseline portfolio carbon emissions section and a most current year portfolio carbon emissions. I'll start with this bottom one. This is taking the information that is entered in the property data and calculating your portfolio emissions based on it. And this baseline year carbon emissions will have to be provided by the user either through the calculator if you have your baseline carbon emissions calculated there, or wherever you calculated your baseline year's data. Say, for example, say, for example, this is your first time using the tool and the data entered in the property data tab is your baseline year. You have the option to select this checkbox here and it'll automatically copy the information into here, indicating that your most current year is your baseline year as well. Moving on to the portfolio segmentation tab, this is where you're actually going to start splitting up your portfolio, segmenting it into different groups that you're going to target decarbonization strategies on. So at the top here on the right, you'll see that we have our 3 custom groups that you can segment your portfolio by, as well as some included groups that we found were going to be helpful for users to segment their portfolios by. So you can always add or remove more groups, and you'll see that the group names down here change as you do that. So after you choose how you want to segment your group, you're going to see for first your total number of units, total number of properties, and the percent of the portfolio that each segment has. We do recommend that for total number of properties, you go somewhere above 10, just because it's just a good way to split up your portfolio and get actually sizable segments for each group. And then you have the option to indicate an anticipated change in quantity of units. This is not for new construction. This is for if you're planning on acquiring existing properties or selling off properties or units within your portfolio over the period of your target date. So you have the option to include that here for this specific segment if you're planning on either acquiring existing properties or selling off existing properties. Then you'll see that we have for this segment, the percentage of heating fuel, hot water fuel, and the policy category that Lauren talked a little bit about, as well as for this specific segment, your total scope 1 emissions, scope 2 emissions, and total site energy. At the bottom here, you'll see some additional information. So this is looking at your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions after you've included your anticipated change in quantity of units. So it'll of course change a little bit. And then you have some just portfolio level visualizations about your portfolio. Moving on to the roadmap tab, at the top here, you'll see some results. This is relating to after you've applied decarbonization strategies to your segment, you'll see this information change. So obviously, before you enter any information into before you apply any decarbonization strategies, it's going to show that you're not on track at all because you're not making any changes. After you apply them, it will hopefully show that you're on track or making some progress towards your goal. So the 2 categories that we have are for carbon emissions reduction and energy emissions reduction. And within those 2 groups, you have both your intensity change and absolute change, which show both your current progress. So this is your current year versus your baseline year, how much you've already achieved. And then your projected year, which is from your current year towards your target year, essentially how much you have left in both your absolute change and intensity change. Below that is your existing buildings work plan. So this is where you're going to be actually applying decarbonization strategies to your portfolio segments. So as Lauren mentioned, we have more in-depth descriptions of our decarbonization strategies on our website and through that guide that we highly recommend you use. So you'll first select a decarbonization strategy, or you could select your portfolio segment first if you know which ones you want to apply strategies to, and then select the percent of segment that is going to be affected by the decarbonization strategies and that optional strategy savings adjustment if you need it. If you do select on-site solar, you'll also need to indicate For the percent of RECs maintained, what percent of RECs maintained? So it says 1, but that really means 100% of RECs maintained. And similarly, for offsite emissions reduction, you will need to indicate both the custom emissions factor and the percent of RECs maintained. Lastly, at the bottom, we have our new construction work plan. So this is for any properties or units that you're expecting to build from your current year towards your target year. You're first going to select the expected baseline energy code that will be applied to these new properties, and then the number of new construction units as well as the average new unit size. After that, you're going to go into this table down here, and you're going to populate within this baseline energy code. Do you expect it to just be at code, 15% better than code, 50% better code, and then for those percentages, whether it will have solar or not. After indicating which groups it belongs to, you're going to say whether it's all electric or not. And then if it does have solar, you're going to indicate whether it will be on-site or off-site, and then the total percent of electricity from solar. Lastly, we have our roadmap results tab. This is going to be basically displaying from your portfolio that you included in your property data tab and your decarbonization strategies applied in the roadmap tab. What does your portfolio look at the beginning, at the baseline year and your current year versus your target year? You have some options to change what is displayed. You have options to do it by climate region or by the number of units impacted or energy savings. There's a lot of different options for how you want to display information here. And the real goal of this tab is to be able to share kind of the story that you've built from your roadmap with other stakeholders, and kind of maybe sell your story if you're planning on sharing this with other members of your organization. And that's pretty much it. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Ian. And to note, we've done tutorial videos that for each step along the way that are approximately 2 to 3 minutes long that go into much more detail, give you a little bit more explanation. So take this as a quick run through and sort of an overview, but please note that there are many more resources in order to help you get started. Also to note that if you're looking at this and you're thinking, I think this might be applicable to my portfolio, but I really want to talk more about what I have and to see if this is appropriate, please feel free to schedule a 30-minute free technical assistance call with us. I put my Calendly in the link, and I'll make sure to share it with Brett if he wants to send out any sort of follow-up email after this. I'm not sure, Brett, if you do or not. But that is all for now. I will go ahead and also share my email in the chat. And we can open it up to questions.
Thank you so much, Lauren and Ian. And before we get to those questions, real quick, just as a reminder, I know we went through a lot of stuff pretty quickly. So as a reminder, you can rewatch this session. You can share it with your friends, post it online. We'd love for you to help us get the word out. It'll be available up on our YouTube channel, and you can go there in a couple days or subscribe and get instant access when it is available. Also, as a reminder, for those of you watching this in the future on demand, so not right now, take your quiz with an 80% passing rate and you will receive your continuing education certificate. For those of you watching this right now, check your spam for certs at gutenbergcerts.com, and as long as you are appropriately logged in to Zoom and hear the whole time, you can find your certificate there. And just a reminder, those of you interested in continuing our multifamily housing conversation, we'll pick back up again and actually even reference off of state policies on some of the green affordable housing, low-income housing tax credit programs, and a grading system state by state by our members at the Blue Green Alliance Foundation in 2 weeks from today. And then October 4th, we'll be talking about multifamily electrification. So we're going to talk a lot about multifamily in the next coming weeks. So I hope you'll join us. And again, as always, a huge thanks to our board of directors, our volunteers, our executive director, Jose Reina, and our top tier sponsors who are helping you decarbonize your multifamily buildings. Mitsubishi with air source heat pump systems for individual units or for whole building applications, and Rheem for air source heat pump systems, and all of our sponsors. So, Lauren, I was looking at, and you and I were talking before the event, so I'm going to bring it up, so but I was looking at sort of that last tab you showed, Ian, on new construction and the ASHRAE, and that caught my eye because what we were talking about, Lauren, again, was going back to some of the Inflation Reduction Act money, right? And as you said, there's not enough. And it's going to be gone hopefully fast, and more programs will come out. But in the meantime, 179D, that money, to my knowledge, is not going to dry up. And you're talking about, substantial dollars per square foot. It's a program that's always existed. And so the way that I understand 179D to work, and has always worked and has been boosted, is that you take the reference ASHRAE 2007 or now 2019 standard and do better than that. So what I'm getting at is your tool, at least in the quick, fast review of it, Ian, and I know there's a lot to pack in, it looked like it was only under new construction. And yet I believe this is also available to existing, but you have to reference not on where your building was, but on where ASHRAE wants you to be. So am I understanding right? Did I see that right, Ian? And if so, should people know that, hey, even if you have an existing building, you can still reference ASHRAE just to get a sense of where you might be to see how close you are to achieving this tax credit?
Yeah, it definitely could be used in that regard. That you read that correctly, Brett. Just to note, we started developing this tool prior to passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. So we see lots of ways where it can be used. It's not specifically always designed to make that really simple transition, but yeah, we do think so. To note, the reason why we didn't put that ASHRAE into the existing portfolio is because we know that often existing buildings are much worse than those ASHRAE standards. So saving 20% on an existing portfolio segment, could be nowhere even close to like ASHRAE 90.1 2007 even. But it's a good place to start. So.
And then considering that on the home energy rebate, or HARE, I think it is, again, it looks like, as you mentioned, there's a 10% set aside from states for multifamily, and potentially up to 20% energy savings. And I believe that is against the actual building itself. So potentially maybe something like this could help people determine if they're on that track for that program, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I would also say, DOE said that 10% for multifamily is a minimum. States do have the option of increasing that allocation should they choose. So for those of you in the multifamily sector, if you'd like to see more specified for multifamily, you saw my numbers. You've got your tool right there to go advocate for something different.
And I'm glad you said advocate, because as of this recording today, and all the way through, sadly, January 31st, 2025, in some of the states you all live in, you will have the chance to continue to advocate to your energy office to get them to do something. Make sure these rebates are equitable. Make sure they're being distributed to those who don't get access to rebates. Whether they should be single family or multifamily, I'm not going to weigh into that one. I don't want to have an opinion there. But make sure you're advocating and talking to your energy office and presenting them programs like this and what SAHF is doing, so that they can make an informed choice on what programs to leverage and be excited to adopt this, and not wait till that day. But I know some of them may wait till past that day. Not going to call out any specific states, but anyway, I don't, if any of you all have some questions, please put them in. We can chat for a little bit longer. The only other question I had, Lauren, was going way back to the beginning on some statements you made, and considering the fact that you sort of have this sort of yes/no for electrification of the building. What we know in certain states like mine, cold weather climate, heavy coal states, we've got extraordinary electric rates and what I would call subsidized gas rates, maybe, because I don't know how they're so low. And I'm glad they are, but it makes it very difficult. And so I think you were saying in your tool, it's giving you this sort of bad performing EUI. Is that taking into consideration if you're in a state like mine, you'll get a really good EUI when you electrify because it's, quite honestly, it's still a lot less carbon, even with all the coal we have. In most cases, we're finding.
Mm-hmm.
But your electric rates might spring up. I was just looking at an ASHRAE report the other day where they converted someone from an old gas boiler to an electric heat pump, and it was a negative. It was a loss. And they're like, wait, I'm not doing this. So, is your tool looking at energy? Is it looking at carbon? Is it looking at cost on the UI? Do you get to look at all three? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so that's a great question, Brett. So, the tool is really heavily focused on both reducing your carbon intensity or helping you track how much you're reducing your carbon intensity per square foot, your energy intensity per square foot, and overall carbon emissions reduction and energy reduction. So, like if you upgrade from a gas, boiler to a much more efficient gas boiler, there is savings associated with that. You could sort of play the game that way. One other thing that we have within the results tool is we also have energy pricing. So we've used EIAs and then like a little bit more of an aggressive energy pricing. Yes, we know that natural gas rates in some locations are low right now, but we also know that there's volatility that our members are experiencing. And even sometimes when we have higher electricity rates because of fees and other things, I'm here in Georgia, I have very high fees in my natural gas, that sometimes accounting for some of those things can help sort of paint a bigger picture. So we don't get into necessarily the details around your utility rate change because this is sort of tracking out into the future, but we at least give you an overall sense of where are you at now with energy pricing and where are you potentially going to be in the future with energy pricing.
And what about time of use on demand programs? Does that play a role in your system to say, hey, if we can get all of our people to shift their energy load through whatever it may be, and then that will also ultimately reduce our carbon. Is that something you're considering tracking, or is that showing up in there?
Yeah, so it's not now. We reserve the right to include it in the future. It's really hard to figure out like what does time of use look like, and in a way that we can sort of say, if you have a segment of your portfolio in the Southeast, if you do like a time of use sort of strategy, this is where you'll end up at, versus like the same thing for like California, because we know that those are really different. I think that once we see the industry be able to put out a little bit more around like what actually happens when we employ those types of strategies, it definitely has the ability to be put into this tool.
Well, great. We are at our time today. I don't see any other questions. So Lauren, Ian, I'm really appreciative of your time. Thanks for SAHF for putting this together and doing all this work and allowing you to come out and speak with us. Where, again, just as a reminder, can people reach out to contact you or learn more or access these tools?
Yeah, so please go to our website. Please schedule some time for TA. And then Brett will make sure that, do you send out an email after this?
Yes, yeah, we'll get some resources sent out to the people live. So
we'll make sure that the folks get that. But yeah, please go to our website. The tools are all available for free on there. You can download it and contact us through there or through the email addresses you see on your screen.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for coming, and take care. Have a great rest of your week. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Be sure to check out all of our courses available online that you can watch anytime and anywhere to pick up your CEUs. Before you go, make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube to get weekly updates and stay up to date on green building science courses, webinars, and home tours. Thanks again.